a question for you. How do you find rest? What do you do to rest? You know, if you've got some time that is just all yours, what do you do to rest? I'm keeping my eyes averted. For some people, a round of golf is how they rest. For others, Claire, golf is a good walk wasted. You know, there are different people have different opinions. You know, a good walk ruined. When you go on holiday, what do you do to rest? Aid and I, we have to compromise. We get up and we go for a walk and we do exploring and all of the stuff that I want to do in the morning, and then in the afternoon we come back and we relax and maybe get in the hot tub if we've got one there, or read a book, so that Aid gets the opportunity to relax. That was especially important when you were working long hours, just needing that time to do nothing other than read a book. Someone said to me that their definition of rest is taking their watch off. I thought that was really interesting. You know, they can get up when they want, they can eat when they want, they go for a walk when they want. Rather than being tied to a schedule, they just do what they want when they want. That sounds fantastic to me. But I know that others of you go on holiday. Richard, if you're listening to this on the online, I know that for others of you go on holiday and you have a schedule of places to see. You have places to eat, things to do, things to see. And if you didn't have that schedule, you wouldn't fit it all in, and you'd feel like you'd had a wasted opportunity, a wasted holiday. I think if I went on that kind of holiday, I'd need to go back to work for a rest. So rest is different, isn't it, for each of us? But it's vital. Rest is vitally important. Even God, when he'd finished all work of creation, rested. The God who never gets tired, the God who never needs to sleep or slumber, he rested. That shows us, we who do get tired, how important rest is. But do you not find we live in a culture that values us by what we do? Busyness is a currency. I was really not well last week. I thought it was just a bit of a hot flush last Sunday morning. Actually turned into something really horrible, and I was at half strength all week. I'm still feeling a little bit shaky today. But I'll be honest, for a week, I did what needed to be done. I went to the groups that I needed to go to. I led the stuff I needed to lead. And then, when that was done, I went home and I rested. But my goodness, did I feel guilty. I felt guilty for resting. I felt guilty for going to have a lay down. I felt guilty for reading a book. I felt guilty for not being busy. And then we all have different personalities, don't we? I've got a question for you. I said it wasn't cafe church. It's not cafe church, but you are allowed to talk to one another. Discuss with the people sitting next to you. Would you rather, you can only have one or the other now, no cheating, no one's allowed to say both. Would you rather go to a vibrant Christian festival with loads of stuff going on, like a spring harvest type thing, or whatever other festivals that you go to? Or would you rather go on a silent or a quiet retreat? Big, noisy, loud festival with lots of activities, or silent or quiet retreat? Talk around your tables, tell each other which you prefer and why. You have to choose only one, you can't say both. So tell each other which you'd rather have and why. Quiet retreat? Yeah, I thought so. Lively festival, fancy that! You all decided, have you convinced one another why you're right and they're wrong? Shall we have a show of hands? Okay. Those of us who would much rather go to a lively, vibrant, active festival. And those of you insane people who would much rather go somewhere quiet. Yes, we'll lay hands on you and pray for you later. Those of you who got the answer right, explain to them why they're wrong. But the answer is different, isn't it? For each of us, this will surprise you, I'm very much the festival kind of person. Joining in with thousands of people, praising, praying, learning together. The noise, the hustle, the bustle, that refreshes me. That invigorates me. That brings me back to life. A week of silent or quiet reflection, quite frankly, the thought of it is terrifying. A friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, actually, I think it was Peter, actually, who you've all met, he went on a silent retreat, and I think he said it was for a week. You couldn't talk for a week. You'd have to gaffer tape me down. Could you imagine? Just don't get ideas, church, thank you. Just over a year ago, though, when I was really, really seeking God as to what was happening in my life, what was he calling me to do, what was he asking me to do, I was just coming to terms with the idea of leaving my last church, of laying all of that down, all of the people that I'd carried, all of the people that I'd loved, all of the things that we'd done. And I booked in to go up to the Northumbria community. Has anybody ever been up there? Oh, you should. You really should. But I went up there for a retreat for 5 days. I'd wanted to go for a few years, but the week that I'd wanted to go on had been full. And then all of a sudden, there was this space. It really was God's significant timing. And so I booked onto this retreat week. But as the time got closer and closer, I started dreading it. You get that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach. And I started dreading it more and more, to the point where Peter was so worried about me. He, as my spiritual director, as my friend, he said, cancel it and he'd refund the cost of it. But I took my courage in my both hands. He's good at that, actually. He's good at that kind of reverse psychology. Don't do it then, June, I'll sort it out. No, I'm going to do it. He's good at that. I should figure that out by now, really. 10 years down the line, I'm just kind of figuring out his methods. But I took my courage in my both hands, and off I went into the wilds of Northumbria, all alone. One of the things that I'm dreading, if I'm honest, was the idea of being quiet. One day we actually had a silent afternoon. And I just thought it was going to be awful. I'd actually planned. I confess far too much in this pulpit, don't I? It's not good for me. But I'd actually planned on the silent afternoon to take myself off to my room, which was absolutely gorgeous, by the way, like a really good hotel room. It really was amazing. So those of you, if you are that way inclined, if you really do fancy a retreat, you can't beat Northumbria community. But just step out your comfort zone and go for it. But on the silent afternoon, I'd planned to go and hide in my room and read a book, a godly book, possibly even the Bible, but I was going to go away. I was going to go somewhere else for that time. But on that morning, they encouraged us not to do that, but to be alone together and in the silence to let God speak to us and to minister to us. But that actually we were sharing together in silence. I was absolutely mortified. I thought they could read my mind or something, it's like she's planning to sneak off. But that phrase, being alone with God together really struck me. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a go. It's only 2 hours. What's the worst that could possibly happen? They can't throw me out. I've booked, I've paid, But my goodness, it was an effort. But in that silence, I heard God speak to me in ways, to be fair, that he had spoken many times before, but words that I needed to hear, to reflect on, and then to act on. And that silent afternoon was completely wonderful, and it all came flooding back to my mind this week as I started reading through Psalm 62, which talks about being quiet before God and resting in God, so that we can hear God speak. In Psalm 62, we actually find King David. Well, we don't actually know when he wrote this psalm, so to be honest, we don't know if he was king yet. But we find David making an effort to be quiet and still before God because he wants to hear God speak. And God doesn't let him down. God speaks into the silence and he says 3 incredible things. But let's not race ahead. I'm going to read to you Psalm 62. Now, if you've got your Bibles, that's fantastic. But I'm going to, if you will indulge me, those of you who come to my house groups know that my translation of choice is the New Living Translation. I think it is absolutely wonderful. It's far more free-flowing. So I'm going to read to you from the New Living Translation. And it says this: I wait quietly before God, for my victory comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress where I will never be shaken. So many enemies against one man, all of them trying to kill me. To them I'm just a broken down wall or a tottering fence. They plan to topple me from my high position. They delight in telling lies about me. They praise me to my face, but curse me in their hearts. Let all that I am wait quietly before God, for my hope is in him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress where I will not be shaken. My victory and honour come from God alone. He is my refuge, a rock where no enemy can reach me. O my people, trust in him at all times. Pour out your heart to him, for God is our refuge. Common people are as worthless as a puff of wind, and the powerful are not what they appear to be. If you weigh them on the scales, together they are lighter than a breath of air. Don't make your living by extortion or put your hope in stealing. And if your wealth increases, don't make it the centre of your life. God has spoken plainly. I have heard it many times. Power, O God, belongs to you. Unfailing love, O Lord, is yours. Surely you repay all people according to what they have done. I love that last line. I just absolutely love that last line. Actually, the NIV that you have there says that God will reward us. Isn't that wonderful? God will reward us. If we take the time and the effort to build our relationship with God, then he will repay us for it. He will reward us. God will reward all people according to what they have done. Now, I've just confessed my sins to you, but I don't believe that I'm the only one who finds it difficult to be still before God. Do not find when we try and do it that, January the 1st, right? Jesus, me and you this year, New Year's resolution, January the 1st, I'm going to have my quiet time with you, God. Let me open my Bible. I haven't put the bins out yet. Have I got a clean shirt for tomorrow? Sorry, Jesus, I'll be with you in a minute. You know, that's me. I get there and my mind starts to wander and all sorts of things come into my head. Now, a few of those thoughts might be from God, but actually most of them are just our anxious minds spilling out into this stillness that we're trying to create. The good news for us today is that in Psalm 62, we have this story of someone who disciplines himself to be silent before God. Your NIV Bibles say, my soul finds rest in God alone. The translation I talked about, talked about being quiet. I wait quietly before God. The Hebrew word can actually also be used to mean silence. And so as the psalmist is quiet before God, God speaks to him. And he hears God say 3 things, and it sounds as though he's heard him say them many times before. He probably had. How many of us need to hear God say things more than once before we either actually believe it or we act on it? But as David listens, he hears God say 3 things. I'm just going to shuffle them slightly out of order to make my point, but forgive me. David listens, he hears God say that God is loving. Unfailing love, O God, is yours. Some of us this morning, some of us here, need to hear that word spoken directly to us from God this week. God is loving. He loves you with an unfailing love. And you know, I can stand here and tell you that until the cows come home. But until you hear God say it to you, until you hear him speak it into your heart, it will still be something that you just know in theory. And my hope for us this week, my genuine hope for us this week as we read and reflect on these words together, as we work through our sheets, is that we will say to God, I need to hear your voice. I need to speak your love to me. I don't just want to know about your love. I want to hear it from you, God. And you know, you can't make the Father speak to you. We know that. God's not a vending machine. We don't put in the right amount of prayer or the right amount of time on our knees. It doesn't work like that. But you know what we can do is to show God that we are waiting, that we are listening, and that we are willing for him to speak to us. And then David hears God say that God is powerful. That's a wonderful word, isn't it? Some of us today, that is the word that we need to hear God speak. Yes, we know God loves us. Yes, we know he's the sort of God who will wrap his arms around us and hold us. And some of us know that deeply. We have experienced that. But actually today and the rest of this week, we need to hear God speak to us and say, I am powerful. I can do something about that situation that you're worrying yourself to death over, that mess that you've got yourself in, about the issues that you're facing. I can do something about this world because I have power. Some of us need to hear God speak his power into our lives this week. And the third thing that David hears is that God will reward people for what they do. God says, if you do the right thing, I will reward you for it. I will repay you. And those are the three things that God says to David in the quiet. And what we're going to do this morning and through this week is we're going to use Psalm 62 to help us find rest in God, to help us be quiet and still and silent before God, however we want to put it. And we're going to use this as a signal to God to tell him that we are listening. We are his people. We are listening. So often we're just doing. But this week we're coming to God saying, I'm listening. We want to hear, God, what you want to say to us. And Psalm 62 is a great place to start. Because Psalm 62 tells us that being still before God is worth it. So over the course of this week, I invite you to be hungry for God. Over the next few weeks between now and Easter, I encourage you to come to church. I encourage you to meet with others to work through your sheets or to listen on the website. Just to say, just a quick aside now, if you are listening to this sermon recorded from home, and you are not someone who usually comes to SBC, but you join us online each week. Now, I know that there are a few of you. I know that Emma, you listen each week. Chris, you have told me you listen each week. If you would like us to send you a copy of the Hungry for God sheets, please email the office, info@southwellbaptistchurch.co.uk. The address is on our website. If you want a copy of the sheet, email Sue in the office and she'll add you to a list and she'll send that to you every Monday. If you're not on the email list, you can always give us a call and we'll print you one off to collect if you're local, or you can find an electronic copy on our website, but I don't know if you can print that off. You might just have to use that online. Finished talking to people online, I'm now back in the room. Let's make that effort this week, church. Let's make that commitment to join together so that as Southwell Baptist Church, we can discover God together so that we can hear from God about his love, and we can hear from God together about his power, and we can hear from God together about the way he will reward you for what you do. And I really do hope you'll agree with me that this is worth some time and effort. And I hope you will agree with me that getting to know God, getting to hear from God and deepening our relationship with God It might not be easy, but it is most definitely important, and it is most definitely worth it. Okay, Psalm 62, finding rest in God. This is a psalm written by David, as we've said, at a time when he's under extreme pressure. But he stills himself and then he hears from God. It's important for us to realise the pressure that David is under, and we grasp that a bit more as we read through the psalm. And it's important because sometimes we think, oh, well, when I'm less busy, then I'll manage to be still before God. When everything's a bit calmer in my life, then I'll manage to be still before God. When my life's a bit chaotic, when my problem is solved, when this, when that, when the other, then I will manage to be still before God. But David here is in a terrible position, and he still says, no, I will still my soul before God. I will find rest in God. I said earlier this week I've been really tired. And actually, reflecting on that, isn't it true that the most common answer, other than I'm fine when they're really not, when we ask someone, how are you? The reply comes back, I'm fine, but I'm tired. I'm tired. And I love the fact that tired people can come to God and find rest. Or don't we get worried about things, or we get stressed? And David knew all about that. He wasn't some super spiritual hero, even though that's the way that history in the church has tended to paint him. We say, oh, King David, a man after God's own heart, and we set him up on a pedestal. Actually, I think it might be important to spend some time as a church journeying through David's life and faith. Because actually, David was an ordinary man. He was a shepherd who became a king. He wasn't a monk or a hermit, tucked away from the stresses and the strains of life. He was an ordinary person like you and me, who worked out how to find rest in God. And God calls us and he welcomes us when we come exactly as we are. Now, the first couple of verses, and this is the reason I read to you from the New Living Translation. The first couple of verses said, I wait quietly before God. Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? I wait quietly. But actually, the Hebrew words, the original translation of the psalm, suggests it's more of a struggle than that. It might be better understood as, I am going to wait quietly before God. Do you know we've lost the ability to wait for anything in our culture nowadays? Everything is instant, isn't it? You go to McDonald's, you want your food instantly. The bus stops, they tell us exactly how long the buses are going to be. And nobody sits and waits. They're on their phone, texting. I'm guilty as charged, texting, sending this message, replying to this email, playing this game. We've lost the ability to wait quietly, to still our souls. And so the psalmist says, I am going to wait quietly before God. My mind is flying off in all sorts of directions. I've got my worries, I've got my stresses, I've got all the things that concern me, but I am going to be still before God. And it's like the psalmist is talking to himself. He's saying to himself, finding rest in God matters. And I'm going to take some time to do it. And the first couple of verses are actually repeated in verses 5 and 6. And even in our translations, it becomes a bit more obvious that he's having to work hard. And he says, yet my soul finds rest in God. I will wait quietly before God. I don't know if you noticed as we read it, but there's not a lot of prayer in Psalm 62, is there? There's not a lot of prayer in the sense that David is praying to God. He doesn't actually get praying, arguably, till the last couple of verses. And I read some books this week that said actually there isn't any prayer in the whole of Psalm 62. But even if you count the last couple of verses, the prayer is very short. So here's what I'm kind of thinking for today and for this week. We want to learn how to pray, don't we? Of course we do. We recognise that praying is important. It matters to us. It's good. But first, before we go dashing in with all of our lists, and before we start rushing to God and asking him for anything, let's learn what it means to be quiet before God. Not ask for anything, but just be quiet. We sang it, didn't we? To be in your presence, to sit at your feet, not rushing around, not coming with all of our thoughts and our lists and please Jesus do this, that and the other. Because actually it's when we come in that quiet, not asking for anything, that's when we have a simple trust in God. And sometimes simple trust is what we need. And simple trust might improve our faith in God when we do ask for the big things. So this week, as you work through your sheet, I'm asking you to take time to be still before God. To take the time to be silent before him. And to use the notes that you've been given as a way to help you do this. Now, for those of you activists in the room who are starting to have a bit of a panic attack, this doesn't mean that we do nothing this week. It doesn't mean that we empty our minds or we switch our brains off. But it means that just for a while, we hang back from the things that we want. It means that just for a while, we stop asking God for things. And we remember, as the psalmist puts it, that our salvation and our honour depend on God. And let's learn to trust in that quiet place where it is all about God and it's not all about us. So I want to encourage us this week to try this, even just for a couple of minutes a day, and I know it's not easy. I was telling you earlier about when I went on retreat up in Northumbria. One of the days we had a silent lunch, so from 12 till 2 we were silent. I could feel as the day went on, this 2 hours looming over me, coming towards me like a black cloud. And like I said, I was going to cheat. I was going to go and take my lunch back to my room and read a book. Perfect. It's about the only time I'm silent is when I'm reading, and I can read for hours. But they encouraged us not to do that, but to stay in community together and to be alone together, to be silent and focusing on God and listening to God together. So I sat down to eat my lunch. 2 hours, that's all it was, 2 hours. I think about it now, 2 hours is nothing, is it? But it just was like this huge, what am I going to do if I can't say anything? You can't even say, can you pass the salt? What do you do? But I thought, right, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. You know, nothing about you, God, I can do this. When I started, I wasn't very good at it. 2 hours of silence, I couldn't go and escape in a book. I thought, you know, if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. So I set myself to just having a time of being quiet. I thought, I can do this. Just be quiet for 2 hours, don't say anything. Well, you can imagine. The first thing that happened was I started thinking about Adrian and the boys back home. Now, Marky had just started suffering from really bad migraines. So, and I can remember this vividly. I'm sitting there and worrying about him. How were his headaches? Had he been able to go to work? Had he heard anything from the hospital about the scan he'd just had? And so I sent him a quick text message to see if he was okay. And then I thought, oh, heck! Oops! Phone away. I'm saying this, church, to encourage you. I'm saying this to encourage you. Because over the next few days, if you engage with this, we will have, together, church, lots of oops moments. Come and share next week your biggest oops moment. And I'm saying this to encourage you, because there's always something fighting for our attention, isn't there? There's always something wanting a piece of us. But as the afternoon went on, as the 2 hours went on, you know, I just got such a strong sense of God's presence. Just such a strong sense of the presence of the Holy Spirit. And I was so glad that I didn't run off and read my book. Do you know, actually that turned out to be the best day of the whole 5-day retreat. And that 2 hours that I was dreading became such a special time with God. So the thing is, church, if we take this seriously and we try to engage in this over the week, we're going to have lots of oops moments, lots of them. But don't let them put you off. Don't let them stop you. You know, I've tried to write these sheets in such a way that when you have your oops moment, you'll know what to do and you can easily pick it up again. So here's what I suggest. It says, read verses 1 and 2 a few times and then try to be quiet. And then if thoughts come into your head, don't bat tuck them away. If it helps, just write them down. Or, if it helps, if you're the sort of person who does this, draw a picture of them or note them. Think about them for a moment and then go back and start again. Refocus. Quiet ourselves. Read the verses again a couple of times. And spend some time being silent with God, not coming with requests, with a list of needs, or with anything. Simply in silence, listening to God. And I really want to encourage us to cultivate a habit of doing this, of spending time silently with God, not just this week because it's on our sheets to do so, but actually, church, because we want to be a people who hears God speaking. It's one thing to be a church that does loads of stuff if we've left God somewhere behind. We want to be a church. We want to be a people that hears God speaking. Because if we as a church want to grow spiritually, if we want our faith to grow, these are the disciplines that we need to cultivate. I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to you. And as we hear from God individually and together, our relationship with him will grow. Our trust in him will grow. And can you imagine, just for a minute, what that would do in this church and in this town if that were to happen? Shall we pray?